Welcome to the Nourished Child Podcast, a show about childhood nutrition, feeding kids, and dealing with the ups and downs of growing a healthy child. Here's your host, registered dietitian and childhood nutrition expert, Jill Castle.
Hi, friends. Welcome back to the Nourished Child Podcast. I'm your host, Jill Castle, and today I have a special episode. I have my friend, Monica Reinagel, guest hosting this podcast. She is interviewing me about my brand new book, which came out just a couple of days ago, called Kids Thrive at Every Size: How to Nourish Your Big, Small, or In-Between Child for a Lifetime of Health and Happiness. I am so delighted to hand the microphone over to Monica and have her ask me questions about the book, including what the Whole Child Healthy model is all about. What are the 8 pillars of wellness and how do they integrate with the Whole Child Healthy model? We talked a lot about cultivating habits that are meaningful for children that help them develop physical health and emotional well-being. We talked about some of the struggles for parents and parenting in today's world around food, around screens, setting up good sleep hygiene, getting children to move, and role modeling those behaviors. No matter what, we really tried to showcase what Kids Thrive at Every Size is all about and how you, as a parent or a caretaker, can effort raising children who are healthy and happy no matter their size. I hope you enjoy this interview of me by my guest host, Monica Reinagel. Monica is the host of the Nutrition Diva podcast, now in its 16th year. She takes a close look at nutrition research, the headlines, and trends to help her listeners feel more confident about the foods they choose for themselves and their families. You can find all of her links, information about her podcasts, and her coaching programs over at www.nutritionovereasy.com. And here's the show.
Jill Castle, welcome to your podcast, the Nutritious Child Podcast.
Thank you, Monica, and thank you for guest hosting. And we're doing a reverse interview, which I think is going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to turning the tables on you a little bit. And the reason that we're having this conversation is to talk about your new book, Kids Thrive at Every Size. And, I can't help but notice the title of this book mentions the word size, kids thriving at every size. And that makes me wonder, do you feel like we are putting too much emphasis on the size of our kids? We hear a lot of hand-wringing about growing rates of childhood overweight and obesity. I know parents are very concerned about setting their kids up for a lifetime health. And yet here we are talking about kids thriving at every size. So was this by way of a corrective by any chance?
I think in a way, yes, it definitely was a step away from using words like weight and I'm going to use air quotes, overweight, obesity, even fat. Those words are really hurtful for children, for a lot of children. Maybe not all children, but for a lot of children.
They could be hurtful for adults.
Absolutely. And even though we have a movement of more acceptance around those words, I still think that when it comes to children who are forming their own opinions about themselves and the world around them, and the world itself is forming opinions about them, especially if they're in differently sized bodies, I think we all can be a little bit more aware of the language that we're using to describe children's bodies.
So what's better about talking about kids' size than talking about their weight? Is that just a euphemism, or is there more included in that term?
Well, for me, talking about size, I feel is more inclusive, and I do include smaller sized children in this conversation too,
Mhm.
because many of them also feel the same stigma and possibly even discrimination that children with larger bodies experience.
And those parents are often equally concerned. Am I doing this right? Are my kids getting what they need to be healthy? Right. So these concerns exist at both ends of this spectrum, right?
Of course, of course. And our healthcare is very focused on size, weight,
Mhm.
and we tend to tie health to what a person looks like. And sometimes we tie it to their weight. And not always in the pediatric realm is size connected to health. And I wanted to make that distinction because some children are, and are adults as well, just in larger frames. They may be more muscular. They may carry more body fat, but children are transitioning quite a bit and developing and growing and changing. And so I, I just think that it's good to be more aware of the fact that children aren't a done deal in
Mhm.
terms of their size, shape, um, and they're evolving, and more openness around and or acceptance and tolerance for different sizes, I think, is needed today.
Well, I can't help but notice the resonance between the title that you chose, Kids Thrive at Every Size, and a movement that you may have been alluding to a couple of moments ago that gets a lot of conversation in our profession. And that is the Health at Every Size movement, which really focuses more on adults. Is that resonance intentional?
Yes and no. I would say that when I came up with the model called Whole Child Healthy, I really was sort of trying to find a new way to position sort of the traditional medical model, which tends to focus on size and weight and fix it. So if a child tends
Mhm.
to be smaller in size or larger in size, the immediate knee jerk reaction is to fix that size, right? Health at every size definitely embraces sort of the psychological, emotional well being aspects around being healthy in the body that you're in. What I wanted to find for parents, though, was a path forward that embraced both aspects, the physical health aspect
Mhm.
and the emotional well being aspect, and tie them together. And that's sort of where the 8 pillars of wellness come into play. They are 8 different pillars that address both building physical health in children as well as emotional well being.
Can you talk a little bit more about those 8 pillars? Because that you said earlier, there's more to health than just size. Are these 8 pillars starting to flesh out what else is included in health besides size?
Yes.
So tell us more detail about that.
Yes. So the 8 pillars sort of really target both physical health and emotional
Mhm.
well-being. They are family culture. That's the first pillar. This is the most important culture a child is ever going to experience in their childhood is the family culture. And that family culture, should really be supportive and accepting and inclusive no matter a child's size. The family culture also is participating in healthcare or health behaviors, lifestyle behaviors like movement and sleep and how often you watch screens and how you talk about bodies, how you interact, how do you connect as a family. So that is the first pillar and it's very much targeted to helping parents build a positive family culture that's supportive and accepting of their child no matter their size. Then we get into sleep. Sleep is a pillar. I put it second because I find that it's probably one of the easiest pillars for families to put in place and be successful with right off the bat.
So let's score some wins right out of the gate.
Exactly, exactly. And that focuses on sleep hygiene. And we know that, growth happens overnight when children are sleeping. That's when
Mm.
growth hormone is secreted. So there's a lot of physical aspects about that pillar, but also the emotional well-being. This is when children process their emotions. They learn and their memory is activated. They're cementing sort of what's happened in their day, socially, emotionally, psychologically. So there are two sides to every pillar, just as I've explained with the sleep pillar. Um, the third is movement. Many parents and healthcare providers will nod their head and say, yes, this is a real obvious one. Everyone needs to be
Like I just
moving their
did.
body. Yeah. But what I wanted parents to be aware of was that there are physical benefits, obviously, to your health when you move, but there are also emotional benefits as well. The fourth pillar is feeding, and that's the interaction between parent and child around food, around the dinner table, and setting parents up to be really positive feeders so that their children can develop a healthy relationship with food. So this is sort of the stuff I'm known for as one of the pillars. And my listeners will know this, but we talk about feeding interactions all the time. Are you pushing? Are you pulling your child to eat certain things? Are you punishing? Are you rewarding? Or sort of
Mm.
that? We talk about all of that. Eating is another pillar. I included that because children are building their eating habits during childhood. So, are we sitting in front of the television and eating? Are we attuned to our appetite? Do we even understand appetite and how we talk about appetite with our children? So, there's a lot of more mindfulness in that pillar and how to help children understand what their body signals are, how to set them up for good eating habits along the way.
Before we continue, I think we have three more pillars, but I want to just pause right here and unpack a little bit this difference between feeding and eating. Because
Yes,
at a glance, you could almost think, well, that's the same thing, right? That's
right.
about the food that we put in our bodies. Actually, I think of feeding in terms of or in relationship to much younger children, where we are literally feeding them. But
Yeah,
this sounds like a slightly more expansive. And the book really is focused on kids from 3 to 13. So
correct.
by the time they're 13, they're feeding themselves, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
help me understand what you mean, or help the listeners understand, remind them how you distinguish between feeding and eating. I know you kind of included it in your description, but I think it merits just a little bit more time.
Yeah. So feeding is really parent generated. Even though you're not literally putting a spoon in your teenager's mouth, you are setting up the structure around food in the home. That's part of feeding. You're setting up the boundaries around food. So, one of my favorite boundaries is the kitchen is closed. It's closed after mealtime, it's closed after snack time. And so that's sort of the feeding aspect. And the other part of feeding is what are you as a parent bringing to the table? A lot of parents bring their own childhood experiences to the table. I was a clean your plate kid when I was little. I had to reprogram and relearn um, how to feed my own children because that was what I was raised with. And that was sort of the go to, well, this is how you do it. I make the plate for the child and the child eats everything. And if they don't, then they get in trouble or we have to encourage them to eat more. So that's sort of what we're talking about with feeding. Eating is child centered. This is the child, you know, actually consuming the food. And for me, that eating pillar also touches on how the child regulates their appetite and how, as a parent, to help children be set up for success with appetite regulation. So everybody needs to understand, what does hunger feel like, and how do you talk about hunger to a 3-year-old versus a 13-year-old? How does satisfaction feel? What does your body tell you when you're satisfied? What does fullness feel like? I think two very different things, satisfaction and fullness. Um, and then eating is also, how are you setting up the environment at home so that your child isn't doing sort of the unhelpful eating behaviors we know that can get in the way, grazing, sneaking or hiding food.
And
So we get into all of that.
distracted eating.
Distracted eating. And so, really helping children set up great eating behaviors from that decade between 3 and 13, because those will sort of govern how the eating plays out later in life.
Yeah. Okay. I know we still have three pillars to go, but as a fellow nutrition professional, of course, I'm very interested in these topics. And I work mostly with grown-ups
Mhm.
and sometimes on weight management and body health, issues. And one of the things that comes up a lot is that people's ability to regulate and be attuned to hunger and fullness get thwarted by hyperpalatable foods. I know that's kind of a technical term. We all know what that means, right?
Yeah.
Foods that are just very compelling and by design, right? They're
Mhm.
delicious. We will eat them for longer than we will eat a food that is less palatable, maybe past the point of hunger. We'll eat when we're not hungry. We have a hard time stopping, even though we might acknowledge that we are full.
Yeah.
And that's something that people sometimes struggle with for a lifetime.
Mhm.
Um, how is that unfolding in this decade that you are addressing in this book and the interactions with the parents?
Yeah, I think it does go back to, having this ability to guide and govern your children around food because parents are, they are making the decisions, they are preparing the food, correct? And kids are getting exposed to things outside of the home as well.
Yeah.
But that feeding, that structure, those boundaries, that plays a role in this. Understanding your child and their eating behaviors. One of the things I talk about in the eating pillar is that appetite traits are inherited. So you can be food responsive, you can be satiety responsive. Many children who are quote unquote picky eaters tend to be satiety responsive. They fill up fast, they slow down their eating. They're not as interested in eating or drawn to food.
Mhm.
The food responsive children tend to be more interested in food, tend to, get excited about food, potentially overeat food. And these are genetically inherited. And then layered into that, you have temperament. You have the children, their natural temperament is to gravitate to all kinds of foods, and other kids might be disinterested or, slow or hesitant with new foods.
Mhm.
Um, so those play into food as well. Yes, we have hyperpalatable food, and I talk about food in the food pillar. It's really funny. My editor was like, "You've written so much about food. How are you going to write this chapter differently than anything else you've written?" I said, "That's a real challenge," because I'm also showcasing food in this book. There's a lot of food shaming going on,
Mhm.
particularly for parents who are raising kids who might be in differently sized bodies. Parents are shamed because they're not feeding their children the right foods. And so I was really challenged to, showcase food in a way that was super flexible. And that's the goal of that chapter, is to be very flexible with food. I categorize food as highly nutritious, decently nutritious, minimally nutritious. And kids can have all three different categories, but we're leaning more heavily on the highly and decently nutritious foods and being a lot more neutral about food and a lot less alarmist about it.
Yeah, it's hard. I mean, I think
It
in
is.
parents' defense, there is so much messaging coming in. There is blaming going on, and I think parents are really eager to get it right. It feels like the stakes
Mhm,
are really high, and they
mhm.
want to do the best job they can. So they can be a little anxious about things, and that makes them much more susceptible to the fear mongering or the blaming or the anxiety provoking things. So I think we may have snuck into pillar 6,
Yeah.
food, right?
Yes, 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 we have, yeah. And that, again, the goal with that is flexibility around food. You don't have to have a perfect diet. I don't have a perfect diet.
Right.
Uh, our kids don't have to have a perfect diet, but we do want to use what I call a nutrient lens. And that's how I really categorize food. You're looking for nutrients first. I don't really care so much about, the energy value of food. I really care about the nutrient quality of food. And if parents can adopt that lens, it sort of weeds out a lot of the questionable things that people might feel guilty about.
You know, when people get a new puppy and they go to puppy training camp or
Mhm.
puppy training school, the open secret there is that it's not the dog that's being trained, right? It's the human that has to learn how to act in a way to get the responses to allow that dog to be successful in the family. And as you're talking here, I think, before any of us get to be parents, of course, we usually live in our bodies for a couple of decades or
Mhm.
more. And And so we are, as we try to approach this in a really healthy, holistic, supportive way for our kids, it may involve relearning some,
Yeah.
like you mentioned, kind of retraining some of our childhood ingrained behavior patterns. But I would venture to say there may be some adult acquired attitudes, behaviors, beliefs that may also need to be addressed.
Yeah.
And maybe that's a happy side effect
Yeah.
of this work is having an opportunity to sort of to borrow a phrase from our mental health professional colleagues, to reparent
Yes.
some of our own early training. There's a lot going on here at the family
Absolutely.
dinner table, isn't there?
There is a lot going on. And my hope is to, give parents that knowledge, not only just the knowledge. I think that I really try to write books that are practical and prescriptive, not theoretical.
Mhm.
And I really tried to make it practical and a lot of take this. If that doesn't work, that's fine. There's just so much you can be doing. Um, and yes, for a lot of parents, there may be some reparenting. There may be some coming to terms with their own baggage from childhood that may not have been dealt with, or that they may be becoming triggered by their children and their children's eating behaviors
Mhm.
because they're seeing themselves as a child and knowing what they went through as children in terms of being stigmatized or bullied for their size.
Well, right. Or whatever they are going through currently as adults is
Mhm.
going to spill over into that environment as well.
Exactly. Exactly.
Okay. We are, I think, on pillar number 7.
Yes, which is screens. And so screens, are kind of funny. There's a lot of folks that will say there's so many educational benefits to spending time on screens, and I acknowledge that that is true as well. I think when we're looking at children between 3 and 13, there's a real risk for children as they get older to spend too much time on screens, and that takes away from their ability to be physical, to move their body, and it also can interfere with getting good sleep. And so screens is oftentimes not a one and done thing. It's integrated with some of the other lifestyle behaviors that are going on with children. It's also, sometimes children sit in front of screens and mindlessly eat. And so the thing with screens that I will say is, while it can impact physical health, it also can have a very strong impact on emotional well being because children who are on screens are getting bombarded day in and day out with food messages, body messages, health messages that may not be helpful for them.
Right. Yeah. Social media is a whole, uh, ball of wax, separate from just the issues literally inherent in the screens.
Yeah.
Social media is a special category that I think a lot of parents, with Jonathan Haidt's new book, I think on the distracted child, is that what it's called?
Something like that.
Distracted generation. Oh gosh. Sorry, Jonathan. um, yeah, the has really brought to the fore, and I know parents are focused in on social media and also screen time.
Mhm.
Hearing you talk about screens though, and pointing out that there are some really legitimate educational benefits, wonderful learning programs, tutoring programs. Schools are increasingly dependent on
Yeah.
electronic devices to communicate and to just to actually complete the work. So there's no avoiding them. It almost reminds me a little bit about the nutritious, medium nutritious, not very nutritious. We could almost sort screen time into similar categories and
Yeah.
take a similar uh, view that, okay, there's room
Yes.
for maybe some playtime, maybe some screen time that we know is not making us smarter or
Yes.
healthier, but we don't want to let that expand to be the entire screen diet. We're going to exercise some of that same, um, those same boundaries, that
Mhm.
same culture, set up some of those habits and expectations that will help kids self-govern
Yes.
around
Exactly.
screens and just where their attention is, the
Mhm.
way that we hope they can learn to self-govern around foods that may be more or less nutritious or more or less delicious. It's almost a
Exactly.
parallel thing.
Yes, it is. It is. And, you know, things like having a family media plan and engaging your children in sort of what are the parameters, right? Because even leading health organizations are sort of loose on the recommendations for limits around screen time, recognizing that there are a lot of positives from it.
Mhm.
But there's also a lot of negatives, and I think every family will be a little bit different in what feels right. But the point being, think about it, um, and figure out what feels comfortable for your family in terms of those allowances.
Yeah, and I think, those it can be a little hard to stuff the toothpaste back in that tube, and so
So
th
true.
this is one that really does merit some advanced thought and planning
Yeah.
from the parents. What is our plan? What do we wanna try? And not that there's no trial and error or no evolution and growth as kids grow, families grow. Once you have families with kids at different ages, it gets, you know, exponentially more complex.
Yeah.
But that strikes me as something that we don't wanna go in without a plan. We don't wanna be winging that. And it's
Exactly.
also something, similar to, eating and food that well, let me ask instead of sharing my opinion, how important is it okay, this is a leading question, Jill.
Yeah.
How important is it for parents to be modeling the behaviors that they're trying to inculcate in their kids, whether it's around eating or food or screen time or movement.
Yeah.
Do you see this sort of double standard, do as I say, not as I do? And what is
Mhm.
the implication of that for the family, for the kid, for
Yeah.
the parent?
Yeah. So, as I said, I'm pretty prescriptive. Every chapter, every pillar has sort of a research end, has an obstacles that you're going to face if you're
Mhm.
trying to set up, each of these different pillars, and then a how-to section. And in the family culture, the first pillar, role modeling, is one of the key things for parents to embody and do. And that doesn't mean that that's easy to do, but when you look at all the pillars and you see, oh gosh, I've got to be purchasing, well balanced uh, meals and preparing well balanced meals. I've got to be on top of screen time, which means I can't have a household that's too chaotic because the go to is screens when houses are very chaotic. I have to be on top of I can't be on social media all the time. I can't not exercise. I can not stay up all night. And I mean, there's all of these behaviors that, yeah, parents need to, you know, what I say, walk the talk, and
Sure.
really less talk, more walking those behaviors, because uh, kids really are like sponges. They absorb all those behaviors. They see the adults in their lives doing them, and it becomes their norm. It's the barometer for which they self-check themselves
Mhm.
eventually.
Right. And they notice when there's a mismatch
Yes.
between what we say and what we do.
Mhm.
Um, and I mean, the payoff for the adults in the equation is so huge.
It
Okay, fine, do it for your kids.
Right.
Do it in the service of this, setting up a healthy family culture, and then sit back and enjoy. Well, not stand up and enjoy the benefits.
Yes. Yeah, and they will have benefits. That's the beauty of all of this. It works
Yes,
for the entire family.
right, right.
Yeah.
So let's talk about my favorite pillar,
Oh,
pillar 8.
mine too. I get the goosebumps when I think about it. So pillar 8 is self-love, and this is probably, not only is it a pillar, it's the call to action of the book in a lot of ways, because children who are growing up in bodies that are not deemed ideal or normal by society, um, really have a hard time learning to love themselves. And so this chapter is all about um, cultivating self love in your child through actionable, daily activities, the way you talk about bodies, the way the way you encourage your child. I talk about, self-esteem, and it's not how you look or what you did, it's process praise. It's the integrity of sticking with something that you're praising. But yeah, a lot of children, particularly children with larger or smaller bodies, struggle with body satisfaction, self esteem, and self love. And as parents, there are things that we can do to help cultivate that in our children, consciously help them feel good about the skin they're in, the bodies they're in.
It makes it a lot easier to take care of the skin that you're in and the body that you're in when you do have a genuine regard and acceptance of it, whether you're a
Yes.
child or an adult.
Yes.
But I feel like I'd be remiss if I let you go from your own podcast without without at least asking, sometimes, because physical health is part of this equation. It's not just emotional health, it's not just psychological health, family health. Physical health is also something that we're concerned about.
Yeah.
And for parents who have kids in larger bodies, they may be told by their healthcare professionals that this is a problem that needs to be addressed. The
Mhm.
kids may feel like they want to address it.
Mhm.
So I guess I have a two-parter for you.
Okay.
And one is, how do we then as parents respond to that and try to support our kids in learning how to address this
Mhm.
concern and this issue? And how do we do it in a way that doesn't undermine all of this other work that we're doing on self-love and acceptance?
Yeah. So well, first I will say it's not an easy thing, and it's not a pat answer for every family. But one of the points I make in the book is that if your child is larger and has health conditions that need addressing, you should by all means seek that out with your medical team.
Mhm,
Um, there are challenges for some children who carry extra body fat, and they will need to be helped by a medical care team. I think for parents who are facing this challenge, it's important to understand. Well, I think language and how you talk about bodies and health are really important, and I help readers with that in terms of using phrases and language and how to be supportive in that area, but also empowering parents to feel free to have these conversations with their healthcare team and be very upfront about what you're worried about in terms of what the language might be, what the
mm,
child might be exposed to, how they are talking about bodies, how they are interacting with that child. This is your child, and you have every right as a parent to walk that path with your healthcare providers in a very sensitive way that does not, you know, put your child in a position where they are shamed for their body or where they are shamed for their health, right? Um, I work with families who are dealing with this, and I oftentimes say, every healthcare provider will tell you you're going to have to go through most of these pillars anyways. Even if you're on a journey to reduce hypertension or you're on a journey to reduce, hyperlipidemia, your healthcare providers are going to want to see you moving, sleeping well, reducing screen time, you know, eating nutritious food, paying attention to your appetite and learning about your body. So all of those things. So this book can be a great um, asset and resource for parents who are on this journey, but that does not negate the fact that some children will need medical treatment because of what's going on with their body. I make a point in the book to really focus on the health conditions rather than the number on the scale or the percentile on the growth chart. If there's a health condition, it needs to be taken care of.
Mhm.
And I really try to separate that. It's because of the size. Let's focus on the health conditions, because when we focus on the health conditions, we don't disentangle size and worthiness and self-esteem and all of that stuff that can get really complicated.
And I think also embedded in your answer is a reminder that if our kids are dealing with any kind of health challenge, especially one that sometimes gets lumped into a very unfortunate category of lifestyle related conditions, there can be a suggestion that the parent is to blame, the kid is to blame. And I think that's so unhelpful and so unfair, really. And that is my primary beef with that term of lifestyle related conditions, because it kind of implies that if you have one or your kid has one, then you're not living right.
Right. Yeah.
And we know that that is not the case, a wild oversimplification and super unhelpful. So, I guess, in that disentangling health concerns from size concerns, from self esteem and worthiness, is also just a reminder that neither kids nor parents are necessarily to blame for whatever it is that they are trying to address and manage and together as a family.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think one of the things that parents don't realize is, how much body fat you carry, where you place it, what the size of your frame is, how tall you are, is genetically determined. And
Mhm.
yes, the environment plays a role on how those genes are expressed. But there's stuff you have control over, and there's stuff you don't have control over. And oh, by the way, um, children have pretty much no control over, whether they have a habit of movement or what food is in the refrigerator or what the school lunch program serves. They have like the ultimate no control. So
Yeah.
um, I think it's important to think these things through, because societally, it's sort of a black and white answer or a pat answer, a binary. You're either healthy or you're not.
Mhm.
You're either matching the ideal body shape and size or you're not. And it is a lot more nuanced. There are a lot of things to think about when it
Yeah,
comes to our children's health and their well-being.
sure. And, maybe just a final observation on language, and how important it is to be careful with the language that we use, and even, gatekeep a little bit for healthcare providers, and making sure that we have healthcare providers that are sensitized
Yeah.
and not going to be, unwittingly undoing the work that we're doing. And usually step one is for parents to embrace this idea that they don't want to give negative feedback and use negative language about the things that maybe are not the ideal.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's a little trickier to keep ourselves from praising the things that are ideal, which is kind of a tricky little, kind of sets us up for some sticky wickets. So, for example, if you have a child who's dealing with health conditions and we're focusing on the health conditions, and maybe the size also responds and gets smaller, we don't want to be like focusing on that, praising that, reinforcing that. Kids are going to connect the dots.
Right. Absolutely. And that's a great point. Exactly. There's that you can be critical, but you can also be, sensitizing kids to what you might think is a positive message, but where a child can internalize that and really actually translate that to, I need to be perfect. And that
Mhm.
perfectionism is counter to self love, honestly.
Right. Or those things are what make me lovable.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And children are lovable no matter what
Full
they look
stop.
like or their
Yeah.
size or anything. And that's what I think. I think parents who have children on either end of the spectrum inherently know that. I think they know that in their core, that their children are wonderful humans who have so much potential to change the world, to be what they want to be. And yet there's this just dark cloud we call society that is just putting so much pressure and just feedback and telling them that they're doing something wrong and there's something wrong with their child. And it's exhausting. And so hopefully some of what I showcase in this book will set parents free from some of that and empower them to plow ahead on the path that's right for them and their families.
I think it will, Jill. And I want to thank you so much for writing this book. I know writing a book is no small thing. It's a real labor of love, and the world is better for having this book in it.
Thank you.
Better for having you in it. Thank you for this conversation. Thanks for letting me crash your podcast and interview you for the Nourished Child. It's been a real pleasure.
Well, I can't thank you enough. I can't think of anybody I'd rather have interviewing me on this podcast. I have so much high regard for you, Monica, and you're spectacular in your own right. And I thank you again for doing this with me. I appreciate it.
You're so welcome.
Well, there you have it, folks. That was a little taste of what Kids Thrive at Every Size is all about. I have tremendous thanks to Monica for taking time out of her day to play the role of interviewer on my podcast. That was very fun. I enjoyed it so much, and I hope she did too. She's such a great interviewer and does such a great job with collating the question and the answer and summarizing. So I hope that you enjoyed this show. As we part from each other, I wanted to read a little excerpt from Kids Thrive at Every Size. This comes from Pillar 8, which is the self-love chapter. And this is my ending love note to readers who read this book. Dear parent, may you always love yourself so you have abundant love for your child and others. May you create a family culture of respect, acceptance, and dignity so your child may respect themselves and carry these qualities out into the world. May you sleep deeply each night so you greet your child and the day with patience, optimism, and fortitude. May you delight in moving your body so your child catches your enthusiasm. May you feed and nourish yourself well so you can nurture a positive relationship with food and eating within your child. May you enjoy eating so you can show your child one of life's greatest pleasures. May you balance all foods so you can nourish the mind, body, and soul of yourself and your child. May you temper your engagement with screens so your child learns to do so too. May you accept all bodies, no matter their size, so your child always feels respected, accepted, and accepts others. May you embrace the goodness of all bodies and change the world for all children. Love, Jill. Thanks for listening, folks. That's it for this week. I hope you have a great week, and I will see you in a couple of weeks when I'm back on the podcast. In the meantime, make sure you check out Monica Reinagel's website, nutritionovereasy.com. And hey, go get a copy of Kids Thrive at Every Size. I'll see you soon.
Thanks for listening to the Nourished Child podcast, where the #1 goal is to help you grow a nourished child inside and out.